Welcome to Battle Network Academy. Today we'll be going over traps. Traps are defensive chips that hang in the background and activate when certain criteria are met. When a trap is active, you will see 4 question marks in the top corner. A good move to make when your opponent plays a trap is to hit them with a charge shot. This will determine if it's an anti-damage or a different trap. If you have Buster Bug in your build, the misfire effect can be used to set off anti-damage when your opponent isn't expecting it. If the trap is anti-damage, the trap will be triggered, and you can go about your next move without worrying about it being blocked. If it isn't anti-damage, you'll have to tread a bit more lightly if you don't know what your opponent is running. You can only have one active trap at a time, so keep that in mind if you want to use, say, AntiNav when you have an anti-damage up. All traps can be completely disabled by any cursor chip or attack. Common attacks like Mac Gun or Killer Tail can be difficult to dodge and are reliable ways to remove traps. There are 6 different kinds of traps. The first and most common one is AntiDamage. AntiDamage is a null element chip that protects you from one attack that deals 10 or more damage. Regular buster shots will still pass through AntiDamage and will not activate it. Hi, Editing Blue Star here. It's any damage below 10 that will go through AntiDamage. You can get your buster to deal 10 damage per shot with buster ups, and that will activate AntiDamage. When it does activate, Mega Man is removed from the battlefield for a short period of time and will send a shuriken at your opponent, dealing 100 sword damage. Anti-damage can also be used during TFCs to avoid heavy-hitting attacks. An interesting quirk to anti-damage is it won't activate when certain animations are playing. For example, if you're hit with an attack during Killer Death Beam, while you have anti-damage up, your attack will still play out and you won't take any damage from the incoming attack. After your attack animation ends, then anti-damage will trigger and send the shuriken at your opponent. Next up is AntiNav. AntiNav is a null element chip that activates when your opponent uses a Navi chip. When this happens, your anti-Navi trap will trigger and it will steal their Navi chip, allowing you to use it against them and gain all the benefits from it. AntiNav also steals any damage boosts that were applied to the attack through chips like Attack 10 and Attack 30, including the ×2 effect given from Full Synchro and Rage. AntiNav can only be triggered by Mega chips, so Gigas like Base and Delta Ray will still go through. AntiNav can also trigger AntiNav. If both you and your opponent have an AntiNav up, and you use a Navi chip, your opponent's AntiNav will be triggered, which will take your Navi chip and use it against you, which will then in turn trigger your AntiNav, allowing you to use your own Navi chip. Next up is AntiSword. AntiSword is a sword element chip that triggers when your opponent uses any sword element chips, or a chip that has sword as its secondary element, like Fire Sword or Yo-Yo. When it triggers, you are protected from the initial sword attack, and it will shoot out 3 sonic booms that deal 100 sword damage each. During this, you gain the Invincible buff. AntiSword also protects you from dimming sword chips like Proto Man or Cross Divide, and it will activate after the time freeze sequence is ended. Next up is AntiRecovery. AntiRecovery is a null element chip that triggers when your opponent uses a recovery element chip. Recovery is a hidden element. It is only on a handful of chips, which are all 8 recovery chips and the 3 roll chips. When AntiRecovery is triggered, it will convert your opponent's recovery chips to damage. This effect ignores defenses like Undershirt and the Invincible buff. If Anti-Recovery is triggered on roll, it will cancel the attack and damage them based on how much roll would have healed. And also, for some extra salt in the wound, a poison panel is placed underneath your opponent. Next up is Element Trap. Element Trap is a null element chip that triggers when your opponent uses one of the 4 prime elements, the 4 prime elements being Fire, Aqua, Wood, and Elec. Element Trap is a bit messy to use. If you use it when your opponent is using an elemental attack, like Thunderbolt or Bubble Shot, the chip will fizzle out and you'll lose it completely. Also, in this scenario, if you had another trap active, like AntiDamage, it will still replace it as if it was active. Element Trap has different effects depending on what attack triggers it. If a fire attack triggers it, the entire battlefield will be covered with explosions, dealing 240 fire damage. If there are grass panels anywhere on the battlefield, they will be completely removed, and if your opponent is standing on a grass panel when it's triggered, it will deal ×2 damage. If an Aqua attack triggers it, the entire battlefield will be covered with bubbles, dealing 240 Aqua damage. If your opponent is standing on an ice panel when this goes off, they will also be frozen. If a wood attack triggers it, the entire battlefield will be covered in Pollen, dealing 240 wood damage. When this happens, your opponent will also get the Confused debuff. If an Elec attack triggers it, the entire battlefield will be covered in Lightning, dealing 240 Elec damage. When this happens, your opponent will also be paralyzed. And the final trap is a program advance. Bodyguard is a sword element trap that acts like anti-damage. When it's triggered, it will send 10 shurikens at your opponent, dealing 100 sword damage per shuriken. Another check off of the defensive chip checklist. Thanks for watching, and y'all have a good one.